They called him Old Blood and Guts, a man so fierce even the Japanese command whispered his name in fear. He wasn't in the Pacific, yet his reputation stretched across oceans. This is the story of the man who made Japan's generals believe he could crush their empire in weeks. General George S. Patton. In the final months of 1941, before Pearl Harbor, Japan's intelligence units were watching everything. They studied America's top military minds, and among them, one name stood out. Patton, the man who had crushed every exercise, who spoke like a warrior reborn from ancient Rome, who told his soldiers, "May God have mercy upon my enemies, because I won't." At the time, Patton wasn't fighting Japan. He was commanding America's armored divisions in Europe and North Africa. But his military philosophy, fast, brutal, relentless, frightened the Japanese high command. Reports from Tokyo's military attachés described him as a modern samurai, a warrior of pure will. And in Japanese culture, such men were rare and deeply respected, but also feared. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941, their officers believed the U.S. Army was slow, untested, and weak. But Patton shattered that illusion. Within months, he transformed American tank warfare in Africa, moving faster than anyone thought possible. Japanese strategists took notice. If this man ever came to the Pacific, they feared their island defenses would crumble. Patton's reputation became a psychological weapon long before he ever faced them. But who was this man they feared so much? George S. Patton, Jr., born in California, a descendant of soldiers, he studied war like a religion, memorizing ancient battles, writing his own code of honor. He believed in destiny, in reincarnation. He once told a friend, "I have fought in every war since the beginning of time." To his men, he was both terrifying and inspiring. To his enemies, he was a storm that never stopped. As his tanks roared through the African desert, word of his victories spread. Japanese newspapers quietly mentioned the American Iron General. He was unpredictable, unstoppable, and utterly ruthless. Every move he made forced Japan's strategists to rethink their plans. What if America sent Patton to the Pacific? Could anyone stand against him? The answer would come not through battle, but through fear, deception, and a global rumor that changed how Japan saw the war itself. Because soon, the Japanese would believe Patton was already coming for them. In 1943, something strange began spreading through the halls of Tokyo's military intelligence. Whispers of a man who was never seen, never confirmed, but deeply feared. They called him the Ghost General, and that ghost was George S. Patton. After Patton's stunning victories in North Africa, the Japanese command began to panic. Their analysts collected reports from Europe, decoding Allied radio chatter. One message, misinterpreted by Japanese intelligence, claimed that General Patton was being transferred to the Pacific. That rumor, though false, spread like wildfire. Within weeks, Japanese officers believed the most aggressive general in the world was preparing to lead the invasion of Japan's islands. Inside the Imperial General Staff offices in Tokyo, maps covered the walls, red pins marking possible invasion routes. One officer asked, "If Patton leads them, what will we do?" Another replied, "We cannot stop a man who does not know how to stop himself." To the Japanese, Patton represented everything they respected and feared: discipline, aggression, and destiny. They began studying his tactics as if he were a ghost haunting their every move. Reports described him as the modern Alexander, whose tanks moved faster than thought itself. Every time an American victory happened, Japanese newspapers would quietly whisper, "Patton must be there." His name became a weapon. He didn't even need to fight in the Pacific to control it psychologically. And then came Operation Bodyguard, the Allied plan to deceive the Axis powers about where and when invasions would occur. British and American intelligence deliberately spread fake reports that Patton was preparing to invade Japan after Europe. The Japanese swallowed it whole. In their minds, the ghost general was already sailing toward them. Truth, Patton was in Europe, tearing through Sicily and later France with a speed that shocked even his allies. But in Tokyo, his legend was already alive. Every Japanese commander knew his name, his face, his voice. One officer wrote in his diary, "If this man leads America in the Pacific, our homeland will fall within months." What's remarkable is that Patton himself had no idea how much fear his NA. They called it the Ghost Army. But this army wasn't made of men, it was made of lies. And at the center of this masterful deception stood one man, General George S. Patton. The Japanese believed he was coming. They were right, but not in the way they thought. In early 1944, as the Allies prepared for D-Day, the world was obsessed with one question. Where will the Americans strike next? The Germans thought they knew, and so did the Japanese. They were both wrong. The Allies used the most brilliant ruse in military history, Operation Fortitude. Its mission? Make the enemy believe Patton was about to lead an invasion in places he would never actually go. To the Axis powers, Patton was America's deadliest weapon. So the Allies used his image as bait. Fake radio transmissions, inflatable tanks, dummy soldiers, all made to convince the world that Patton commanded a massive invasion force in southeast England. German and Japanese intelligence both confirmed it. Patton's army is ready to invade. But in reality, Patton was hundreds of miles away, waiting for his real command in France. Japanese observers stationed in Berlin sent reports back to Tokyo. Patton's army grows stronger every day. His presence alone ensures American victory. Those words terrified Japan's generals. They believed if Germany fell under Patton's advance, Japan would be next. For months, their military planners adjusted defense strategies, redeploying forces, wasting precious time, all because of a phantom. This was more than military trickery, it was psychological warfare on a global scale. Even before a single shot was fired, Patton had already invaded Japan's mind. They had built their Pacific strategy around avoiding him, and that meant, strategically, they were already losing. When D-Day finally began in Normandy under other generals, the Japanese were confused. Their intelligence didn't understand. Where was Patton? The answer came weeks later, when he unleashed his real army in France, tearing through German lines with unmatched speed. Once again, Japan's worst nightmare had returned. If this man ever turned east, their empire was doomed. By 1944's end, Patton was no longer just a general. He was a legend, a ghost, and a threat that even oceans couldn't contain. The Japanese had never met him, but they feared him more than anyone they ever faced. By late 1944, the Japanese Imperial Command had a problem. They were running out of time, out of allies, and out of hope. But what haunted them most wasn't the bomb or the American fleet. It was one man. General George S. Patton, Japan's military intelligence, believed that once Germany fell, the Americans would turn their entire might eastward. and they were sure Patton would lead that invasion. He was everything the Japanese military both admired and feared, a ruthless warrior who believed in destiny. So they started preparing not for an invasion from any general, but for Patton himself. In Tokyo, secret reports circulated among high-ranking officers. They called it the Patton Contingency. It outlined emergency measures if Patton ever led U.S. forces toward Japan. Cities were to be evacuated faster, defensive lines reinforced. Troops were ordered to study Patton's tactics from Africa and France, to think like him, to predict him. But no one could. Ironically, Patton was focused entirely on Europe. He had no orders to move toward the Pacific, but his legend had already crossed the ocean. Every victory he achieved in Europe, Sicily, Normandy, the Battle of the Bulge, echoed in Japanese war briefings. To them, it was proof that America had a superhuman general, one who crushed armies through pure force of will. They studied his photos, his speeches, his temper. They even analyzed his personal beliefs, that he was a reincarnated warrior from ancient times. One Japanese officer wrote, "A man who believes he cannot die will never surrender." And that was exactly what made Patton so terrifying. He didn't just fight wars, he lived them. Even as U.S. forces under MacArthur and Nimitz advanced through the Pacific, many Japanese believed Patton was secretly guiding them. Rumors spread through the ranks. He is coming after Germany. We will be next. This invisible pressure began breaking morale before the Americans even arrived. Fear had become a weapon, and Japan had fallen under its weight. Tokyo's defense planners shifted resources unnecessarily, trying to prepare for an enemy who was never coming. Every move Patton made in Europe forced them to alter their Pacific strategy. They were trapped by their own imagination, and Patton's legend was doing what bombs could not. It was defeating their confidence. But as 1945 dawned, a darker force was rising, and soon Patton's fate would change forever, not on the battlefield, but in a way no one expected. December 21st, 1945, a winter morning in Heidelberg, Germany. The world's most feared general lay in silence, his body broken from a car accident. General George S. Patton, the warrior who terrified enemies across continents, was gone. But in Japan, his death meant something far greater than anyone imagined. News of Patton's death spread quickly. In America, soldiers wept. In Europe, even German officers expressed disbelief, one calling him the last pure soldier. But in Japan, the reaction was different. Within hours, secret communications inside Tokyo's intelligence department confirmed it. The Iron General is dead. And for the first time in years, they felt, for Japan's military leaders, Patton had become a myth larger than life. He was never their direct enemy, yet his name had haunted every strategic meeting. His death didn't just end a life, it ended an idea that America had a living embodiment of unstoppable will. But even in death, Patton's legend refused to die. One surviving Japanese colonel later recalled, "When we learned of Patton's death, the room went quiet. We were relieved, and yet we respected him. He was a warrior in the truest sense. Had he lived, perhaps Japan would have fallen sooner." It was a strange mix of fear, honor, and respect. Emotions reserved only for the greatest foes. Patton represented something the Japanese deeply understood. Bushido, the code of the warrior, to die fighting, to live with honor, to never surrender. They saw him as a Western samurai, a man who lived by the sword of discipline and destiny. Even those who hated him could not ignore his spirit. To the Japanese mind, his death was not the end. It was the transformation of a warrior into legend. Months after his passing, intelligence briefings still mentioned him. Some Japanese officers refused to believe he was dead. Rumors claimed that Patton had survived and was preparing for a final invasion. Even as Japan surrendered, his shadow still lingered, in the air, in memory, in myth. Because fear doesn't die easily, especially the kind that Patton inspired. The truth was simple. Patton had changed the psychology of war. He showed the world that speed, aggression, and belief could defeat armies larger and stronger. And even those oceans away like Japan learned that lesson through fear. His body may have died, but his reputation kept marching. But what happened after his death was even stranger, because soon both allies and enemies would begin to ask, was his death truly an accident? Or was the world simply not ready for a man like George S. Patton?